Welcome to a new edition of the Neon Jazz interview series with jazz drummer, composer, educator, and radio host Jay Sinnett. He opened up about his vision for his latest 2019 CD, Just When You Thought, with the Jay Sinnett's 0 to 60 Quartet. He's originally from Pennsylvania, and he went to Virginia in the mid-70s to serve in the United States Navy. After completing his military service, he began his music career. He would evolve into a consummate drummer, composer, and bandleader who has produced 15 albums, and he has written over 250 compositions, and he's even scored music for 5 documentaries. He has also spent 3 decades behind the mic as a jazz producer and host for NPR's affiliate WHRV-FM 89.5 in Norfolk, Virginia. He's an interesting cat, so please get to know him and dig this interview, my friends.
Okay, hey Jay, thank you for taking a minute out for Neon Jazz today, man. I appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Your latest album, which is the 2019 CD, Just When You Thought. Talk to me a little bit about this album. Talk to me about this album and maybe anything that might be on the horizon artistically for you.
Well, my artistic objective with Just When You Thought, well, there were a few objectives. One was to showcase the versatility of the quartet. I think so highly of these musicians, and they're such creative, interesting, versatile musicians that I just wanted to write music in different styles of jazz that showcases the versatility of the quartet, that leaves them good improvisational room. And another objective was to expand the melodic content in my compositions. Because as a drummer, I've always been somewhat insecure about writing melodies because we don't deal with melodies like a saxophone player would or like a piano player would. Our main objective is rhythm. But to play melodically from an instrument that, or think melodically from an instrument that really doesn't deal with that part, it's been a challenge, and it's been a lifelong challenge in my career. But I think we got to something pretty special on this record in terms of the melodic content and harmonic content of what I was trying to do. So those are a couple of objectives I had with the record.
Talk to me a little bit about, I'm going to go back to your beginnings here, and talk to me about growing up in Pennsylvania and kind of some of the music you were listening to, jazz you were listening to, and how you really kind of started taking off from there.
Well, it's interesting. My mother just passed away a few months ago, a couple of months ago, right? And I've been back and forth to Pittsburgh, going through her house, and clearing out some things. And I came across the record collection, right? I started going through these albums, and I was just blown away. I completely forgot how much jazz that was in that house. Like I came across Oscar Peterson Trio, We Take Requests, Frank Sinatra, Count Basie, Joe Williams, Ella Fitzgerald, Billie Holiday, Carmen McRae, Dave Brubeck. There were so many jazz albums in that house, along with great classic soul records, and then some magnificent gospel from Mahalia Jackson and the Five Blind Boys of Alabama, some early soul with Ray Charles, and James Brown and the Famous Flames, the original albums from the early 60s. There was an incredible amount of varied music in my house growing up. But I will honestly say, for the most, as a young boy, was gospel music and soul. I didn't remember too much of the jazz for some reason. And over time, that turned to rock, got into classic rock in the late 60s. Jazz came much later. I was introduced to jazz pretty much from a true listening perspective in the early 70s with jazz fusion, with Miles Davis and the transitional period he was going through at that time with Bitches Brew and Weather Report, and then entering Chick Corea's Return to Forever and the Mahavishnu Orchestra, those bands, and the art rock bands like Yes and Atomic Rooster and Pink Floyd and all. And then someone turned me on to bop, and I heard drummer Max Roach. And that was a new revelation for me, obviously. playing drums. At the inception of hearing that, I didn't understand it. It was way above my head. I knew there was something very special with bop, but it was very complex, man. It was very layered. And one thing I remember when I first heard that music, what really got my ears to perk up was the sound of the instruments, the acoustic bass, the acoustic piano in that context with the drums played like that. The sound of the drums. It was very different than all the electric music I was hearing. It just felt so pure and natural. It was like, man, I'm really listening to a set of drums in the room, not with a bunch of microphones all over them. So that was probably the first true connection I had with traditional jazz and hearing bop and appreciating the sound. And then, over time, the artistic content of the music, which was, I realized about 10 years after that, it was a lifelong study. It was going to be a lifelong study. So that's how I was brought to the music.
So you left Pennsylvania for Virginia, you got into the Navy and got your start there. Talk to me a little bit about your beginnings in jazz and how it kind of took hold in your career and started going.
Well, when I joined the Navy right out of high school. It was actually 2 weeks after I left high school. I was in boot camp, terrified. And I remember auditioning for one of the Navy bands. Back in those days, they would let you audition if you were in boot camp. Today, I don't think they do that. They took away that policy. But this is an important point here because, particularly for potential students or parents of musicians or students that are studying this music, this is an important point here because I got so hung up on all my buddies telling me how great I was in high school, in the high school band, right? Really people that didn't know anything about music in theory. But they were just being kind. Hey man, Jay, you're great. Jay, you're great. And what that did, it made me believe I was great. So when I got into boot camp, I just got this urge. Well, I want to audition for the band because I'm great. And it was truly one of the most embarrassing, humiliating experiences of my life because this chief just basically grabbed me by the shirt and threw me out of the audition because I tanked so badly. But I'm glad that happened in retrospect because it put a whole bunch of things in perspective for me. I had to learn to figure out this stuff for myself, not believe everything someone was going to tell me. And I realized how much work I had to do if I was going to do this seriously. So my Navy career ended prematurely because of a motorcycle accident. And then I got out into the world again, basically with little or no work skills. The only thing I could kind of do at that time was play drums a little bit. And I started dating a singer who was in a popular 10-piece funk horn band. They were a fantastic band, and I would watch them rehearse and hang out with them. And their drummer was outstanding. His name was Mark Hopkins, and I would listen to Mark at the rehearsals and night after night on their shows, and it was inspirational to me. So I started practicing again. I got some more drums, and he helped me a lot. And then I started playing dance music in the 70s, the disco thing. That was, the only way I can really make any kind of living, because I didn't have any other work skills at the time. So I just played the disco thing, and then eventually I went to college and used my GI Bill. And it was in college where I started getting into jazz and composition and harmony and theory. And after that, I was playing jazz. It was interesting because when I started playing jazz, it's like my whole circle of friends changed. My life did a 180. All the partying and the late night dance club gigs, and all that stuff was over. So it was about jazz now, man. It was about living a different lifestyle and dressing differently, having a different group of friends, and the studying was very, very different. Because when you're playing the dance music and stuff like that, man, you don't really practice and really study. You're more interested in partying. But when jazz became front and center, that was a whole new revelation for me.
So what do you like best about being a musician?
I love the creative process. I love creating, man. I'm a pure artist. I'm a chef. I love creating flavor profiles in my food. I used to paint. I wasn't very good at it, but I just love the process of creating layers, seeing things. I always like to see the stories in creation, how the mind works like that in creating different kinds of ways to produce a story. Like I like to think that my songs tell a particular story. So it's creating on my instrument and creating compositionally. It's kind of like the way people like to play a crossword puzzle or things that challenge their thinking. I kind of look at it at writing composition, at composing that way, and drumming and coming up with ideas. It goes beyond that in terms of, because you want to reflect soul, you want to reflect passion, you want to put a bit of good emotional content into what you play. So being able to create, being able to see joy on people's faces when they hear the music, if it reaches them, it brings something good in their life. Playing drums is also my principal form of exercising. So it's a very physical instrument to play. You know, I include everything, writing music, playing drums, composing, cooking, all these things as living a healthy lifestyle, man. So, you know, being a musician is, everybody can't do what we do, you know, so I don't take that for granted. It's a very special thing to be able to do what we do. And when people are opening up to it, when they hear you play, that's like the greatest feeling in the world. I just, you know, and I love music, man. I'm not just a jazz player. You know, I love playing all kinds of music. Chick Corea once said there's validity in all of it. And it took me a minute to really understand what he meant by that. And it was really about how you listen to something. That's what that came down to. It said if you listen deeply and carefully enough, you're going to hear something that's going to affect you in a good, positive way. And after he said that to me, man, I just said, wow, I have to rethink this, because you know how we can hear something, we go, you know, I don't like that. That's not for me. And we probably give it a little bit of time. I mean, like a few seconds, and we made that decision already. I just learned to not react like that, not to have these knee-jerk decisions on what I was hearing other people play. I really gave them time. And I'm glad I made that adjustment in my listening habits, because I've learned so much and have gotten turned on to so many different things that I probably wouldn't have had I not heard Chick Corea say that.
Talk to me about the first live jazz show you saw where you thought, man, this is what I want to do.
You're going to laugh at this one. The first show I had ever seen that was remotely connected to jazz was probably the weirdest concert I've ever seen in my life in terms of billing. It was the Mahavishnu Orchestra, right, with John McLaughlin and company, opening for Black Oak, Arkansas. You remember them, Jim Dandy to the rescue? Yeah. That silly song they had out? Yeah. So imagine the Mahavishnu Orchestra coming out and dressed all in their white, right? And everybody around you smoking weed, and they're like, they never even heard of this band. They're there for Black Oak, Arkansas, right? And I remember seeing Billy Cobham and thinking, oh my God, that's the most incredible thing I've ever heard in my life. It was just so big to me. I mean, just so overwhelming and powerful. Billy was a bodybuilder, man. So, you know, he was a big guy. He still is a big guy, but he was really big back then. And hit the drums so hard. But it was everything they were doing that was just it was so beautiful to me, man, in the chemistry. You know, I'm like, how can I dig music like this with no lyrics? You know, this is reaching me in a whole new way. I realize you can tell everybody relates to the spoken word, right? That's why, singers are always going to be more popular than instrumentalists because they have the spoken word happening. But instrumentalists are also telling a story. It's kind of like the way I listen to it. It's like if you hear a language, right, that you really like, you might like French, for example, the inflections of how people speak the language, but you don't necessarily understand what they're saying, but you still appreciate it because it just sounds beautiful to you. That's what I was listening to with the Mahavishnu Orchestra that night. I heard something I didn't understand musically, but it was like listening to a foreign language that I really, really liked the sound of. I don't know if that makes any sense, but
yeah,
that was that experience on that first concert.
Why do you love jazz?
Yeah, that's an interesting question because I was having this conversation with one of my students last year. I made the comment to him that if I was a piano player or a guitar player, I probably wouldn't have gotten into jazz. But being a drummer and playing the kind of music I was before jazz, the repetition, it was boring, artistically boring for me. I had fun and everything, but I knew that there was something else I could do on instrument. I would just crave something more artistically interesting. And that music, the pop and the rock, wasn't offering me, I wasn't artistically fulfilled. And then when I heard the fusion, I'm like, wow, man, this is like 5 steps above what I was playing. And then when I heard the Bach drummers like Kenny Clark and Max Roach, and even before them with Baby Dodds and Big Sid Catlett, the foundational players, right? That was like 5 more steps above the fusion thing for me. And I said, I have to learn how to play this music. This is what jazz presented to me as a drummer. And so with jazz, it was the opportunity for more creative possibilities. That's what got me into jazz. That's what drew me to this music as a drummer. And then the more I learned about the music, the more I educated myself, then it became about the improvisation, collective improvisation, and the composition, writing jazz, and understanding the swing and what all that means, and the blues. And, there's just so much in this music. There really is. And I hope people, when they hear jazz, they kind of approach it like I was just explaining. You may not necessarily understand everything. You don't have to understand everything. But you appreciate it for the beauty, the part of, the inflection of the music. And that's how I think we can get more people into this music, is just getting people to make people believe this is worth their time. It's worth their time to sit down and listen and absorb what these great musicians are playing and what they're trying to say.
So everyone has a perception of you, your family, your friends, your fans, but you're living your life. Who do you think you are?
Well, there is that Jay that I have of that view of myself before I wake up every morning. And then there's the realistic guy. I like to think, after I can look back, man, on my life with few regrets. I've done a lot of things. I'm a 30-year broadcasting veteran. I've been playing jazz for over 35 years of my life now as a musician. I've been a music educator, taught for the Governor's Gifted High School program for 12 years. I taught at Christopher Newport University for 4 years. I've done a lot of things, man, working with kids. And that's probably the thing I'm most proud of, is how many kids I was able to mentor and get them in a better place in their development and as human beings. And I can look back on the discography. I have 16 recordings now as a leader. One of my goals in life, as an artist, was to create a body of work. So I've succeeded in doing that. I think 16 recordings under your name, that's a pretty good statement for a body of work. I'm proud of my broadcasting accomplishments in a 30-year career. I can say that I brought a lot of joy to a lot of people over the years, man. I just try to remain positive, be a good role model, and lead by example. So those are the things I'm most proud of, and I don't have many regrets in my life. I mean, like a couple I can think of, like I wish, in hindsight, I wish I would have gone to college right after high school. But at the same time, I'm grateful I served my country. And, I've never had children of my own, so yeah, that's another regret, but that's that was the card I was dealt in my life. I like to joke and say, not that I'm aware of. See, women can't say that. Women can, do you have children? Not that I'm aware of.
Right.
But, there's a lot in my life, man, that I'm very, very proud of.
Right
and
on.
I think when we get to a certain point in our life, when we can look back and say, I honestly don't have many regrets, but then I think that in itself is something to be very proud of.
Jay, hey, thank you for opening up today with me and with Neon Jazz. I really appreciate it. Good luck with everything.
Thank you, Joe, and it's been a pleasure talking to your listeners.
Thanks for listening and tuning in to another Neon Jazz interview, where we give you a bit of insight into the finest cats in Pennsylvania, Virginia, Kansas City, and spots all over the world, giving fans all that jazz. And thanks to Jay for his time, music, and stories. If you want to hear more interviews, go to Famous Interviews with Joe Domino on the iTunes Store. Visit neonjazz at youtube.com, and for everything Neon Jazz all the time, go to the neonjazz.blogspot.com. Until next time, enjoy the jazz, my friends.
Neon Jazz.